Okay, folks, we're going to move into Chapter 9, Early Byzantine Art. Also moves all the way into what is called Late Byzantine Art. So there will be three main periods during this time. And if you look at your map, which is at the beginning of the PowerPoint, just like all of these, it gives you an idea of the area that we're talking about. And you should notice that we're really focusing on the Mediterranean area in particular, and this is going to be specifically the Far Eastern Roman Empire. This is going to be the area in particular where Constantine is going to be converting the central governance of Rome, or the Roman Empire, over to the east towards Jerusalem, because that is the holy place of Jesus' birth. And because of that, that's why he's taking the center of attention away from Italy and taking it over to what was our Constantinople, named after he, and that is where the Byzantinum activities really developed in the far eastern part of the Roman Empire, which is not that far from Jerusalem, which is part of that old Mesopotamian area. So, the dates that you need to know are for the early Byzantine 324 to 726 CE, Middle Byzantine 843 to 1204, and then late Byzantine 1261 to 1453. So all of this is going to transpire within a good 1100 years, and it's going to butt up with the Renaissance and the early Renaissance. So this is going to occur for a long period of time. Like I told you in the late antiquity chapter, that these concepts coming up with the Constantinian art is going to continue on all the way up into the Renaissance, where there's going to be a revitalization of quote-unquote humanism, or antiquity, which is going to be more of an interest in the old Roman and Greek concepts of humanism, meaning that humans bear more order over the natural world around them. So that's essentially going to be the end of the Western instruction with fine art in this class. Will be at the onset of the Renaissance, but everything is going to be very Judeo-Christian oriented up until that point. And so here in the Byzantine area, we'll begin with the early section, and what's going to happen here is, let me just read off a couple things so that you know you have the context correct. We call it, at that time it was not called Byzantine, it was just the Eastern Roman Empire, and they did consider themselves actual Roman emperors. And there was one in particular, and they did not label themselves Byzantine. That came much later, actually during the Renaissance, when they called this period the Byzantine period. But the main Roman emperor in this area that followed Constantine was Justinian. And the rise of the Justinian started this early Byzantine era. And it's considered a golden age, and it's considered a golden age because of the height of influence that it had in this part of the world in particular. And we'll see artwork that will reflect some of the old canons or standards that the Roman Empire would use prior to the shift of focus over to the east in Constantinople, or what is present-day Istanbul, right there at the precipice between Hungary and Turkey. And one in particular, and just recall that during this time there's not going to be a lot of sculpture. It's going to be mostly the architecture for the churches that is going to be the high interest and the high focus. But there is one sculpture, a relief sculpture in particular, figure 9.4, that's going to show you the use of these old Roman canons and standards, even present here during this Byzantine time. And this dates all the way to mid-16th century. Okay, so this is very much later on, but you can see, oh, I'm sorry, mid-6th century. So this is going to be some of the beginnings of the early Byzantine era. And if you look at figure 9.4, you'll see Justinian on top of a horse, very much like we saw with Marcus Aurelius. And this composition of showing the ruler or the Roman emperor being placed upon a horse in this equestrian status is an indicator of world conquering, and that's why this title is Justinian as world conqueror. And this is something that they would use. They would place Augustus upon a horse, they would place Marcus Aurelius upon a horse, all of these Roman emperors, except for Vespasian in particular, because he was more on the grounds, jackboots on. He was formerly a general of the Roman armies, so his position was less of a, or he and his sons were less interested of this aggrandizement, and so was Constantine. But this technique and this indicator of the Roman emperor being placed upon a horse is going to also be present here to the far east in the Eastern Roman Empire, in Byzantine. And this sculpture is showing that with figure 9.4 because he's placed upon this horse. So let me read a couple things here in particular just to kind of give you the context. So this shows that they still have a connection to old Rome, which would be Rome itself in Italy, by having this theme on a horse. And the other theme, some of the other themes that they would show would be holding an orb, um, like, and this orb was an indicator of global conquest, so to speak. So that was something else that was used that we didn't look at a lot during the Roman art section, but that was another theme that they would show. And of course, the bare feet and then pointing to the sky was another indicator of, or another theme that they used to show the kind of divine nature of the Roman emperors. So they would show this horse, and what I want you to know is by showing Justinian on this horse, it gives homage back to the old Roman themes that they would use during the Roman art period. Okay, and shows defeating barbarians. And then another theme, of course, is showing the defeat of barbarianism. So you have these registers being used again, right? And where we left off with late antiquity, there was a discussion on bringing those registers back, and it's no longer going to be about the super detail, even though there is a lot of detail here in this piece in particular, but bringing those registers back to kind of show a heavenly, a hellish, and then also an earthly realm, so high, middle, low. So instead of depth of perspective, there's going to be more of these stratas. So you have an upper strata, which is considered this heavenly realm, this middle strata, which is the earthly realm, and then the lower strata, which is supposed to reflect this hellish realm. So in this case, with this piece, down low in that lower strata is the barbarians that Justinian had defeated, and the defeat of them is coupling them with this kind of hellish-like mentality, or this hellish-like consciousness. And by putting them in the lower strata and showing that his earthly dominance upon this horse is indicating that he is placed there as a divine emperor to defeat these barbaric and hellish activities. So we're going to really start to see this heavenly, earthly, and kind of sinful like registration start to develop. And this piece in particular is reflecting that. So it's coupling that of the old Roman themes with these new late antiquity themes that came out after Constantine pushed forward the idea of Christianity over polytheism in Rome. And so this is going to continue again all the way into the Renaissance, and even to today. But definitely within the fine arts influences, we're going to see more of the biblical influences now, and parables and themes more present in the artwork, and coupling it with old Roman themes, and then slowly moving away from those old Roman themes into more of the Judeo-Christian themes. All right, so like I mentioned, architecture is going to be huge, And one of the first things that we're going to see that's going to have a really big importance is called Hagia Sophia, figure 9.5. And the image of 9.5 is actually several different time periods of influence. So when you're looking at Hagia Sophia, figure 9.5, what I want you to focus on in particular is the center, that center dome. Not the four what are called minarets on the corners, because that is going to be influential of the Islamic rule in this time. So those four corner towers that you see in figure 9.5 are Islamic influences, and we're going to talk about that in the next chapter. But everything that's central to the middle of Hagia Sophia was the original, even though it has been reconstructed, it's the original configuration of what this church looked like right after Constantinople. I mean, right after Constantine. This is in Constantinople. But everything that's on the outside, on the exterior perimeter of Hagia Sophia, came later. So you have the minarets, the four corners that came later whenever Islam overtook Turkey and ruled it and added on to the church. And then there's also something called flying buttresses that are on the exterior that came later on during the Middle Ages. But the center core foundation of Hagia Sophia originally came from this Byzantine period. All right. And this is what's called a central plan. And if you look at figure 9.6, that's what I mean. Meaning that this dome, what's called a dome of the penitentives, is in the center of the church. Okay, when before we looked back at the basilicas and we looked at all of the aerial views and constructions of the churches in the past that had those transepts, it had that nave, and it had that apse, which you can see here. It still has that apse, but it doesn't have that nave anymore. It doesn't have those aisles. It doesn't have that transepts. It's all about the dome feature. And whenever the dome is in the center of the construction and of the architecture, it's called a central plan. So figure 9.6 shows us that aerial dissection of that central plan. And that dome is a very specific piece of architecture that you need to know. And it's called the dome on penitentives. And the dome on penitentives, if you break down the word penitentives, it means like 5 places of contact. So this dome is completely covered, and it doesn't have that oculus in the middle like we saw with the Romans, but they're taking that hemispherical design that they used on the Pantheon in particular during Hadrian's rule in the Roman Empire, during the High Roman Empire, and they're now completely covering that dome and not having that oculus in the middle, and with that they're creating these 5 different points of contact for the weight and distribution of that dome to come down on the very, very top. And you're going to see this development of creating more and more ambience and more atmosphere inside of these architectural buildings. For them, it was to show more light coming through, and by more illumination and light coming through, it's supposed to be, according to them, synonymous to divine presence. So with these structures being built in this way to have this central plan and allowing these windows to shed this light into these high atmospheric acoustic domes, it gives the sense as if something heavenly is present within the construction of these temples. And in particular, Hagia Sophia is going to be one of the first that we're going to see this technique. And if you look at figure 9.7, you can see the restored cutaway of what it looks like and what it originally looked like whenever it was first constructed. Because of war, because of invasion, because of all of these different religious warfares that have happened over time, a lot of Hagia Sophia was taken to ruins, but it was rebuilt. And then after it was rebuilt, then Islam came in and took over and then added the minarets, and then after that You had the Middle Ages, and you had the flying buttresses that come in later. And so we'll talk about all that another time. But let me read a few things here so that you have some information. This was designed by Justinian, and so Justinian was a huge element whenever it came to the developments of the architecture of the churches, as well as all the artwork during this time in the early Byzantine area. And it was considered at that time world architecture. So this type of architecture, this central plan, found its way in many different areas of the world. Okay, and then I've already talked about the minarets, I've already talked about the buttresses. And one thing is, if you notice, it doesn't look like it's plain and unpretentious, but this was considered a very unpretentious structure, very unpretentious form of architecture. And then whenever all the buttresses and the minarets came in, it became it was then considered very ornamental in nature. But the exterior is very scarce. It's not meant to prepare worshipers for anything really ornate on the exterior. So that's what we mean by plain. The exterior is very plain. But whenever you enter inside, you can see the cutaway image, it becomes very ornate. And the reason for that is that it's not about the exterior world, it's about the interior or more heavenly world. So these structures, whenever you enter and you become a convert or a worshiper of Christ, then whenever you enter into these facilities, you can feel that presence, that ornamentation of divinity within. But on the outside, they're very plain and they're very simple and austere. And that's very much true to a lot of the tenets of belief at this time. It's not about the outside, it's about the inside. And Hagia Sophia reflects that religious tenet and that religious belief. But then again, let me go back real quick with the dome on the penitentives. And if you look at figure 9.9, you can see what that architectural fixture is supposed to look like. You can see it that it's all pointed down and held on these different corners and these different angles, and it almost looks as if this dome in the center is floating within space or within heaven. And again, it's supposed to show how that dome still stands and it floats as if it has this heavenly presence to it. All right. So I tell you what, I'm going to go on and stop this video here, and I want you to take these first 20 minutes to go and really look at Justinian as a world conqueror, as well as Hagia Sophia. And whenever you're looking at Hagia Sophia, really focus on that dome on the penitentives, as well as the importance of ornamentation on the inside and austerity on the exterior. And whenever you look at that figure 9.5 and you see all of that excessiveness on the exterior, know that that's not the original purpose of this structure. The original purpose of this structure was to be austere, plain, and unpretentious. And that comes from Constantine. So if you look back and be able to compare this Hagia Sophia with Basilica Nova, which was ushered in by Constantine, you can see that the exterior was very austere and the interior was more ornate. So this Hagia Sophia under Justinian is derived from those concepts that Constantine was trying to push forward as he became Christian and as he was moving away and asking the Roman Empire to move away from this polytheism into this more austere and unpresumptuous nature of Christianity or Christian tenets. And so the architecture is going to start to reflect that and be able to compare and contrast and see the differences, but also the major similarities in those ideas and concepts. And in the next video, you're going to be looking at what's called San Vitale, which is going to be derivative of Hagia Sophia. So be able to compare and contrast all the way to what Constantine was doing up until now during this Byzantine period. Alright, I'll leave you at that, and then I'll get the next video up for you really soon.